Chapter 1. The bells above the door of Tall, Dark, and Decaf didn't just chime when Luca entered. They practically screamed for mercy. Luca scrambled inside, a leather portfolio tucked precariously under one arm, and a vibrating phone balanced between his shoulder and ear. He looked like a man who had been pursued by a swarm of bees, or, more accurately, a swarm of architectural firm partners demanding revisions by noon. I know, Sarah. The load-bearing walls are in the wrong place. I'm fixing them," Luca hissed into the phone. He reached the counter and collapsed against it, his eyes darting to the menu board before glazing over. Too many choices, too many variables. If he had to decide between a macchiato and a flat white, his brain might actually short-circuit and leak out of his ears. "You look like you're vibrating," a dry, low voice remarked. Luca looked up. Theo was there, standing behind the espresso machine with his usual expression of bored curiosity. He was wearing a black apron that looked far too clean for a Tuesday morning, and his dark hair was pushed back from his forehead, revealing eyes that seemed to see right through Luca's panicked exterior. "I'm having a crisis," Luca gasped, finally shoving his phone into his pocket as the call ended. A structural, emotional, and caffeine-related crisis. Theo leaned his elbows on the counter, unbothered by the line forming behind the frantic illustrator. "We don't serve therapy here, just beans. I don't have time for beans. I have a 12 p.m. deadline, and my brain is currently a blank canvas. Please." Luca leaned in, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Just surprise me." Theo's eyebrow arched to slow, deliberate movement. This was their game. For the last 3 months, Luca had refused to order off the menu. It had started as indecision, but it had turned into a daily challenge that Theo, despite his grumpy demeanor, seemed to take quite seriously. "Surprise you?" Theo repeated, his fingers tapping a rhythmic beat on the edge of the register. "You're already at a level 10 on the anxiety scale. If I give you a quadruple shot ristretto, you'll start seeing through time. Then give me something that feels like a hug, but a productive hug. A hug that tells me I won't be fired today." Theo stared at him for a long beat. It was the kind of intense eye contact that usually made Luca look away. But today, he was too tired to be shy. "Go sit down, Luca," Theo said, turning toward the syrups. "I'll bring it to you." 10 minutes later, a ceramic mug was placed gently on the small wooden table where Luca had spread out his blueprints. The drink was topped with a dense, creamy foam and a single dried sprig of lavender. Luca took a sip. It was warm, slightly floral, and carried the deep, earthy undertone of honey. The sweetness didn't hit like a hammer. It bloomed. Lavender honey latte. Luca guessed, looking up. Theo was standing there, a damp rag thrown over his shoulder, with a hint of cardamom. "It's for focus, and because you're wearing a purple tie, and I figured you liked to coordinate." Luca blinked, looking down at his tie. He hadn't even realized he'd put it on. "You noticed that?" "Hard not to," Theo remarked, already turning back toward the bar. "You're the only person who comes in here looking like a chaotic rainbow. Drink your coffee. Fix your walls." As Theo walked away, Luca noticed the small handwritten note on the napkin tucked under his mug. "The walls are fine. It's the windows that are the problem." Luca looked back at his sketch. Theo was right. The windows were the problem. He took another long sip of the surprise drink, feeling his heart rate settle for the first time all day. Maybe the surprise wasn't just the coffee anymore. Chapter 2. By Wednesday, the surprise me routine had become less of a convenience and more of a ritual. Luca found himself sitting at the same wobbly corner table, the one with the best view of the espresso machine and, by extension, the man operating it. Theo was in his Elementa blur of stainless steel, steam, and calculated movements. He didn't move like a barista. He moved like a chemist or an artist. There was a precision to the way he leveled the grounds in the portal filter that made Luca's fingers itch for his charcoal pencils. "You're staring," Theo said, without looking up from a pitcher of milk. Luca jumped, nearly knocking his sketchbook off his lap. "I'm observing. It's part of my process. Visual research. Visual research on a milk steamer." Theo turned, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. He set a cortadas-sized glass in front of Luca. It wasn't on the menu. The foam was a pale, dusty pink. "Drink, before it settles." Luca took a cautious sip. It was earthy, slightly spicy, and distinctly floral. "Beetroot and ginger. With a dash of cayenne," Theo added, leaning against the back counter. "You looked like you were fading. I figured you needed a kick that wasn't just another heart-palpitating shot of espresso." "It's unexpected," Luca admitted, the heat of the ginger blooming in his chest. "How do you do it? The guessing? You're like a caffeine psychic." Theo shrugged, though there was a flicker of something pride, maybe. In his dark eyes, "I used to be a fine arts major. Color theory, composition, balance. It's all the same, whether it's oil on canvas or syrup in milk. You just have to know what the subject is missing." Luca paused, his cup halfway to his mouth. "Used to be? Why'd you stop?" The atmosphere shifted. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder for a second. Theo's expression flattened into its usual unreadable mask, and he reached for a stray rag to wipe down an already spotless counter. "Burnout is a hell of a drug, Luca," Theo said quietly. "Turns out, when you turn your soul into a grade point average, the soul eventually quits." Luca felt a pang of recognition. He looked down at his own sketch-stiff, technical drawings of luxury condos that paid the bills but felt like a cage. "I get that. Sometimes I feel like I'm just drawing boxes for people who will never live in them." Theo looked at the sketches, then back at Luca. For a moment, the barista's guard dropped. "Your perspective lines are perfect, but your shadows are too polite. You're afraid of the dark, architect. I am not." Luca protested, though his ears went red. "Prove it," Theo challenged, nodding toward the sketchbook. "Make something messy today. If you do, tomorrow's surprise is on the house." He didn't wait for an answer. A group of loud teenagers entered the shop, and Theo was back to being the stoic professional, his brief moment of vulnerability tucked away like a tip in a jar. Luca stayed for 3 more hours. He didn't draw a single building. Instead, he spent the afternoon sketching the way the steam curled around Theo's hands, using the darkest charcoal he owned. Chapter 3. The sky over the city hadn't just turned gray. It had bruised. By 4 p.m., a torrential downpour had transformed the street outside tall, dark, and decaf into a blurred watercolor of neon tailgating lights and umbrellas. Inside, the shop was unusually quiet. The humid air smelled of damp wool and roasted espresso. Luca sat at his usual table, but his sketchbook was closed. He was staring at the rain, his chin resting in his palm, feeling the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the storm matching the slow beat of his own thoughts. Theo was behind the counter, polishing a row of ceramic cups. He hadn't said a word since Luca arrived, but he had been watching. He saw the way Luca's shoulders were slumped, the way he hadn't even reached for his phone to check the time. Without being asked, Theo began to work. There was no grinding of beans this time, no hiss of the steam wand. Instead, there was the delicate clinking of glass and the steady pour of hot water. He walked over to Luca's table and set down a heavy, dark blue mug. No foam, no latte art, just a deep, clear amber liquid with a single star anise floating on the surface. "I didn't ask for a surprise yet," Luca said softly, his voice a bit raspy. "You didn't have to," Theo replied, pulling out the chair opposite Luca and to Luca's utter shock sitting down. "You look like you're drowning out there. I thought you might need something to keep you afloat." Luca took the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into his palms. He breathed in. "Smells like cinnamon and orange." Spiced black tea with a hint of bourbon-soaked cherry syrup, Theo said. No caffeine. You've had enough nervous energy this week to power a small city. This is for the rainy day blues, even if the rain is only on the outside. Luca took a sip. It was spicy, sweet, and grounded. It felt like a heavy blanket being draped over his shoulders. How did you know? I didn't even say anything. Theo leaned back, his long legs stretching out under the small table. I told you, I was an art major. You learn to read the composition of a room. Right now, your composition is all cool tones and blurred edges. You're fading into the background, Luca. Luca looked down at his tea, watching the star anise swirl. My firm rejected the library proposal today. Said it was too experimental. They want more boxes, more glass, more nothing. And you want more soul, Theo finished for him. I want something that matters, Luca admitted, looking up. In the dim light of the shop, Theo's eyes weren't just dark. They were warm, like polished mahogany. Do you ever regret it? Quitting the art. Sitting back here making surprises for people like me. Theo looked toward the espresso machine, then back at Luca. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth, the first one Luca had ever seen. Sometimes, Theo said. But then someone like you comes in and treats a cup of coffee like it's a life raft. It makes the boxes I live in feel a little bit bigger. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind that felt like a shared secret. For a moment, the gap between the barista and the customer vanished, replaced by two people hiding from the storm in a world of their own making. Then, the bell chimed. A soaked businessman burst in, shouting into a Bluetooth headset. The spell broke. Theo stood up, his professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. The T's on me, architect. Consider it a consultation fee. For what? Luca asked, his heart doing a strange little flip. For the shadows, Theo said over his shoulder. They're looking much better today. Chapter 4. The cozy bubble of Tuesday's rainy day confession popped the second the bells chimed on Wednesday morning. Luca arrived with a spring in his step and a new set of professional-grade charcoal pencils, ready to show Theo that his shadows were finally behaving. But the stool at the end of the bar, the one Luca usually leaned against while waiting for his surprise, was occupied. The occupant was a man who looked like he had stepped straight out of a high-end fitness apparel ad. He had perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a smile that was currently aimed directly at Theo, like a heat-seeking missile. I'm telling you, Theo, the opening is on Friday, the man said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. The gallery owner is a friend of mine. He'd love to see your old portfolio. You're wasting those hands on steam and beans. Theo was mid-pour, his expression unreadable. But he didn't pull away when the man reached out to playfully flick a stray coffee ground off Theo's forearm. Luca froze. His stomach did a sudden, unpleasant somersault, the kind he usually associated with a failing structural integrity report. Julian, Theo said, his voice flat but not unkind. I told you, I'm not looking for a gallery. I'm looking to finish my shift without a headache. And I'm telling you, you're a masterpiece, hiding in a basement. Julian countered, leaning further over the counter. Come on, one drink after you close, for old time's sake. Luca felt a hot flush creep up his neck. Old time's sake. He suddenly felt incredibly small in his paint-stained hoodie and oversized messenger bag. He cleared his throat, perhaps a bit more aggressively than intended. Theo's eyes snapped to Luca. For a split second, a look of genuine relief crossed his face, though it was quickly replaced by his usual stoic mask. You're late, architect. Deadlines, Luca managed, stepping up to the counter. He pointedly ignored Julian, who was now surveying Luca with the kind of pitying look one might give a stray kitten. The usual surprise? Theo asked, reaching for a clean glass. Actually, Luca said, his voice tight. Just a black coffee. Plain. Nothing special. Theo paused, his hand hovering over a bottle of artisan syrup. He looked at Luca, then at Julian, then back at Luca. Black coffee. That's a bit grim, even for you. I have a lot of boxes to draw today, Luca snapped, his jealousy making him uncharacteristically sharp. He moved to his table, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to focus on his sketchbook, but his ears were tuned to the counter. Julian was still talking, his voice a low murmur of potential and lost talent. Luca grabbed his charcoal pencil. He pressed down on the paper, trying to channel his frustration into a sketch of the shop's ceiling beams. Snap. The charcoal pencil snapped in half. A jagged black line streaked across his carefully rendered perspective, and in his flinch, his hand knocked his water bottle. A dark, muddy puddle bloomed across the page, dissolving his morning's work into a gray smear. "Damn it," Luca whispered, his eyes stinging. It wasn't just the sketch. It was the old-time sake. It was the realization that Theo had a whole life, a whole history of people who knew him better than a surprise drink order. A shadow fell over his table. Luca didn't look up. "I've got it. I'm fine." "You're definitely not fine," Theo said. He wasn't holding a black coffee. He was holding a tray with a roll of paper towels and a fresh drink in a tall, iced glass. "Where's your friend?" Luca muttered, staring at the ruined paper. "Julian. He left," Theo said, setting the tray down. He didn't go back to the counter. Instead, he started dabbing at the water on Luca's table with practiced, steady hands. "He's an old classmate. He doesn't know when to take no for an answer. He seemed to know you pretty well," Luca said, hating how petty he sounded. Theo stopped cleaning. He looked at Luca, his gaze heavy and direct. "He knows the version of me that burnt out 3 years ago. He doesn't know the version of me that's standing here right now." He slid the new drink toward Luca. It was layered dark on the bottom, a creamy white in the middle, and topped with a dusting of cocoa that looked like a stormy sky. "What's this?" Luca asked softly. "It's called the Architect's Recovery," Theo said. "It's got a double shot for the ego, cream to soften the edges, and enough chocolate to make you stop acting like a brat." Luca looked up, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not a brat." "You're a disaster, Luca," Theo corrected, but his voice was softer than usual. "Now, move your hands. I need to save what's left of this drawing." Chapter 5. The Architect's Recovery worked better than any structural repair Luca had ever designed. After Julian's departure, the tension in the shop had shifted from sharp jealousy to a low, humming electricity. "You're still staring at the steam wand like it's a foreign language," Theo remarked. The mid-morning rush had dissipated, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet, bean-scented sanctuary. Luca leaned his chin on the counter, his charcoal-stained fingers drumming against the wood. "It's a machine that turns water into clouds. From an engineering standpoint, it's fascinating. From a me standpoint, I'd probably blow the shop up." Theo looked at the door, then back at Luca. A rare, mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. He unlatched the wooden swing gate of the counter. "Come here." Luca blinked, behind the employees-only sign. "Is this where you sacrifice the people who order decaf?" "Only on Fridays," Theo deadpanned. "Get over here, architect. If you're going to critique my shadows, you should at least understand the medium." Luca stepped into Theo's world. It was smaller than it looked from the outside, tight, efficient, and smelling intensely of toasted hazelnut. Being behind the counter felt intimate, like standing in someone's kitchen at 2 a.m. "Take the pitcher," Theo commanded, sliding a cold stainless steel vessel into Luca's hand. As Luca reached for it, Theo stepped up behind him. He didn't just point. He reached around, his chest nearly brushing Luca's shoulder blades, and placed his hand over Luca's. His skin was warm, his grip steady and calloused from years of manual craft. "Position it at an angle," Theo murmured, his breath ghosting over Luca's ear. "You aren't just heating it, you're stretching it. Listen for the paper tear sound." Luca couldn't listen to the milk. All he could hear was the frantic thrum of his own pulse. Okay. Paper tier, right? Relax your wrist, Theo whispered. His other hand settled lightly on Luca's waist to steady him as the steam wand hissed to life. The physical proximity was overwhelming. Luca could smell the faint scent of Theo's something, woody and sharp, like cedar underneath a heavy aroma of coffee. For a moment, the architectural drawings and the deadlines didn't exist. There was only the vibration of the machine and the weight of Theo's hand guiding his. "Stop," Theo said, clicking the steam off. They stood there for a second too long, the silence of the shop rushing back in. Theo didn't pull his hand away immediately. He looked down at the picture, then up at Luca. Their faces were inches apart, the air between them thick enough to steam. "Not bad," Theo said, his voice dropping an octave. "You didn't burn it." "I had a good teacher," Luca breathed, his heart doing a slow, heavy roll in his chest. Theo cleared his throat and stepped back, the sudden absence of his warmth making Luca feel cold despite the boilers. "Don't get cocky. You still haven't mastered the pour." Theo took the pitcher and, with a few flick-of-wrist movements, poured a perfect, intricate tulip into a ceramic cup. He handed it to Luca. "The signature blend. My own recipe. Nutmeg, dark chocolate, and a secret I'm not telling you. Is the secret that you actually like having me back here?" Luca teased, emboldened by the lingering tingle on his waist. Theo turned away to rinse the wand, but not before Luca saw the tips of his ears turn a faint, betraying red. "The secret is that you're the only customer who hasn't complained about the wait time while I'm playing, teacher." Luca took a sip. It was rich, complex, and lingered on his tongue. It tasted like a beginning. Chapter 6. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Luca hadn't slept. His final presentation for the city library project was in 4 hours, and his digital tablet had crashed twice during the night. He looked, in his own estimation, like a Victorian orphan who had lost a fight with a printer. When he stumbled into tall, dark, and decaf, he didn't even have his sketchbook. He just had a heavy laptop bag and a look of pure, unadulterated defeat. "Don't say it," Luca croaked as he reached the counter. Theo was mid-grind, but he stopped immediately. He took in Luca's bloodshot eyes, his messy hair, and the way his hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his wallet. "I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to call an ambulance." Funny. Very funny. Luca leaned his forehead against the cool marble of the counter. I don't even know. Give me the biggest surprise you've got. Make it a double. Make it a triple. Make it a liquid miracle." Theo didn't move. He just watched Luca for a long moment, his usual sharp wit replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. "Sit down, Luca. I'll bring it to you in 5. I can't sit." "Theo, if I sit, I'll fall asleep and wake up in 2029. "Sit," Theo commanded, his voice dropping to that low, authoritative register that always made Luca's knees feel a bit like steamed milk. "Or I'm serving you decaf." Luca groaned but obeyed, slumping into his usual corner. He buried his face in his arms, the ambient noise of the shop, the hiss of steam, the clinking of spoons, the low indie folk music swirling around him like a lullaby. He might have drifted off for a minute or 10. A soft thud on the table brought him back to reality. There, sitting on a paper napkin, was a massive, dark ceramic mug. The drink inside was a midnight mocha, a deep, velvety concoction topped with a swirl of cream and a dusting of sea salt. It looked like a storm cloud in a cup. "Drink," Theo said. He didn't linger this time. He didn't offer a lesson on steam or a critique of shadows. He just turned and walked back to a sudden rush of customers. Luca wrapped his cold fingers around the warm ceramic. He took a long, deep sip. The salt hit first, then the bitterness of the dark chocolate, followed by the lightning strike of 4, maybe 5 shots of espresso. It was exactly what he needed, a jumpstart to his soul. He felt the fog in his brain start to clear. He reached for a napkin to wipe a stray drop of foam from his lip, but as he rotated the cup to take another sip, he saw it. Scrawled in black Sharpie on the side of the white-rimmed mug, right where his thumb had been resting, was a string of 10 digits. Underneath the number, in Theo's precise architectural handwriting, were 3 words. Text me. Luca's heart didn't just skip a beat. It performed a full-on gymnastic routine. He looked up sharply toward the counter. The shop was slammed. Theo was a blur of motion, steam rising around him like a shroud, his face set in his usual professional mask as he took an order for a complicated frap. But just as Luca caught his eye, Theo leaned over to grab a sleeve of cups. For a split second, Theo looked directly at him. He didn't smile, he didn't wink. He just gave a singular, barely perceptible nod before turning back to the espresso machine. The surprise wasn't the caffeine, it was the invitation. Luca looked back at the cup. The Sharpie was slightly smudged from the heat of the drink, but the message was unmistakable. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his fingers shaking this time, not from the espresso. Chapter 7. The library presentation was a blur. Luca had stood in front of the board of directors, his skin buzzing with enough caffeine to power a small jet, and spoke about emotional architecture with a fervor that was either visionary or bordering on a manic episode. He won the contract, but as he walked out of the firm's glass-walled lobby, he didn't feel the rush of professional victory. He felt the heavy, terrifying weight of the ceramic mug he'd left on his desk, the number etched into his brain. He reached his apartment, threw his keys onto the counter, and stared at his phone. It sat on his bed like a live grenade. 2114 Luca. Hey, it's the architect. I didn't die of a caffeine overdose, in case you were wondering. He tossed the phone face down and paced his kitchen. Too formal, too weird. Why did I call myself the architect? He calls me that. I don't call myself that. Ping. His heart jumped into his throat. 2116 Theo. Disappointing. I had a bet with the morning shift that you'd be seeing colors by noon. Theo, how was the presentation? Luca collapsed onto his bed, his thumbs flying across the screen. The barrier of the counter was gone. The employees' only sign was a mile away. Without the physical presence of the shop, the wit they usually traded over lattes felt sharper, more intimate. Luca, I won. They like the experimental stuff. I think I used the word visceral 4 times. Theo, visceral? Bold choice. Almost as bold as the amount of salt I put in that mocha. Luca, I liked the salt. It was surprisingly grounded. There was a long pause. The bubbles appeared and disappeared 3 times. Luca held his breath. Theo, I wasn't sure if you'd actually text. Luca, you wrote it in Sharpie. Theo, if I hadn't texted, you probably would have sent a search party. Theo, I would have just charged your card for a no-text fee. Luca, why did you do it? The number, I mean? The silence on the other end lasted for 5 minutes. Luca stared at his ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside. Theo, because you've been coming in for months and you still haven't asked for my name? Theo, and because I wanted to see if you were as brave with people as you are with your shadows. Luca felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with coffee. He rolled onto his side, the blue light of the phone illuminating a genuine, goofy smile. Luca, my name is Luca, by the way. Theo, I know. It's on your app rewards account. Luca, you're a stalker. Theo, I'm observant. There's a difference. Luca, prove it. What's my favorite color? Theo, whatever color the sky is right before it storms, you look best in it. Luca's breath hitched. He stared at the screen until the light dimmed. This wasn't just banter anymore. This was a bridge being built, one text at a time. Luca, I'm not sure how to respond to that. Theo, don't. Just go to sleep, Luca. You've had a long day. Theo, and don't come into the shop tomorrow. Luca sat up, frowning. Luca, why not? Theo, because it's my day off. Meet me at the gallery on 4th instead. 7 p.m. No surprises. Just you. Chapter 8. The gallery on 4th was a cavernous, industrial space that smelled of fresh white paint and expensive floor wax's stark contrast to the toasted, cluttered warmth of the coffee shop. Luca arrived at 6:58 p.m., wearing a charcoal coat that he'd spent 40 minutes agonizing over. For the first time in months, he wasn't carrying a portfolio. His hands felt strangely light, and his stomach felt dangerously heavy. He saw Theo standing near a large, abstract triptych. Away from the espresso machine, Theo looked different. He wasn't wearing his black apron. Instead, he had on a dark, well-fitted turtleneck and a silver chain that caught the gallery's spotlight. He looked less like a grumpy barista and more like the artist he had tried to leave behind. "You're early," Theo said, turning as Luca approached. "Architects are supposed to be fashionably late, aren't they?" "I'm an illustrator," Luca corrected, his voice a little breathless. "We're just anxious." It translates to punctuality. Theo let out a soft huff that was almost a laugh. "You look good, Luca. The coat suits you." "Thanks." "You look intimidating. Like you're about to critique my entire life's work." "I only critique people I like," Theo murmured, stepping closer. The air between them shifted. Without the counteracting as a wooden barricade, the height difference was more apparent. Luca had to tilt his head back just a fraction to meet Theo's eyes. They walked through the gallery in a comfortable, low-pressure silence. Theo didn't talk like a tourist. He talked like a surgeon. He pointed out the tension in a brushstroke, the way a certain shade of blue felt lonely, and the structural integrity of a sculpture that Luca hadn't even noticed. "You still see it all, don't you?" Luca asked, stopping in front of a minimalist charcoal piece. "The art, you haven't actually quit." Theo leaned his shoulder against the white wall, his expression darkening. "I quit the industry. I didn't quit my eyes." It's hard to stop seeing the world in layers once you know how they're built. "Then why aren't you in this show?" Luca gestured to the walls. "Your shadows are better than half the stuff here." Theo looked at his hands, the same hands that had guided Luca's through the steam only days before. "Because when I paint, I feel like I'm bleeding onto the canvas. And eventually, you just run out of blood. Making coffee, it's different. It's a gift I can give someone else without losing a piece of myself." Luca reached out, his fingers brushing against Theo's sleeve. It was a small gesture, but in the quiet of the gallery, it felt monumental. "You gave me a piece of yourself every time you surprised me, Theo. You just didn't realize it." Theo froze. He looked down at Luca's hand, then up at his face. The stoic mask didn't just crack, it shattered. He reached out, his thumb grazing Luca's jawline, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I realized it," Theo whispered. "I just didn't think you were paying attention." "I'm an illustrator," Luca breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm paid to pay attention." The moment stretched, taut and shimmering like a wire. Theo leaned in, his shadow falling over Luca, and for a second, the gallery disappeared. There was only the scent of cedar and the faint, lingering ghost of roasted coffee. Then, a loud, familiar voice cut through the air. "Theo, I didn't think you'd actually show." They snapped apart. Julian, the blonde third wheel from the shop, was heading toward them, a glass of champagne in each hand and a predatory grin on his face. Chapter 9. Julian didn't just walk over, he invaded. He slid between Luca and Theo with the practiced ease of someone who owned the air he breathed. "I told the curator you might drop by," Julian said, thrusting a champagne flute toward Theo. He didn't even look at Luca, treating him like a particularly uninteresting piece of gallery furniture. "He's dying to talk to you about that series you did in Berlin. You know, the one with the charcoal washes." Theo didn't take the drink. His hands stayed shoved deep into his coat pockets. I'm not here for the curator, Julian. I'm here with a friend. Julian finally flicked a glance at Luca, his eyes scanning the paint-stained cuffs of Luca's shirt that peeked out from under his coat. A small, patronizing smirk touched his lips. Right, the architect. Charming. He turned back to Theo, lowering his voice to a stage whisper that Luca was clearly meant to hear. Still doing the charity work? I see. Bringing the locals to see how the other half lives. It's cute, Theo. Very mentor-student of you. Luca felt the blood drain from his face. Charity work. Julian, knock it off. Theo snapped, his voice dropping into a dangerous growl. Oh, don't be so sensitive. Julian laughed, reaching out to squeeze Theo's shoulder. I'm just saying, it's a waste. You belong on these walls, not explaining them to people who draw blueprints for a living. Come on, 5 minutes. The curator is right over there. Theo looked at Luca, his eyes wide and pleading, but Luca was already backing away. The words charity work and mentor student were ringing in his ears, mixing with the memory of Theo saying he liked surprising people because it was a gift he could give without losing himself. Was I just a project? Luca wondered, his chest tightening. A way for him to feel like an artist again without actually having to risk anything. Luca, wait, Theo said, stepping toward him. It's fine, Luca said, his voice sounding thin and brittle. Julian's right. You have people to talk to. Important people. I actually forgot I have a rendering due tomorrow. I should go, Luca. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous, Theo. I'm being an illustrator. We're busy, remember? Luca forced a smile that felt like it was made of cracked plaster. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and bolted for the heavy glass doors of the gallery, the cold night air hitting him like a physical blow. He didn't look back. If he had, he would have seen Theo shaking Julian's hand off his shoulder with enough force to spill both glasses of champagne. Instead, Luca spent the next 3 days in his apartment with the curtains drawn. He didn't go to the shop. He didn't check his phone. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way Julian had looked at Theo like they belonged to a world Luca was only visiting. By Friday, the silence from his phone was deafening. He hadn't texted, and neither had Theo. Spilled milk, Luca thought, staring at a blank page in his sketchbook. You can't clean it up once it sinks into the wood. Chapter 10. The interior of Tall, Dark, and Decaf had always been warm. But without Luca's chaotic energy in the corner, it felt sterile. For Theo, the hiss of the steam wand no longer sounded like a tool of the trade. It sounded like a long, exhausted sigh. Theo caught himself glancing at the door every time the bells chimed. Each time it was a jogger in spandex or a hurried businessman, his chest tightened a little more. He had checked his phone so often the screen was smudged with ghost prints of his own anxiety. 10:42 a.m. Theo. Luca, we need to talk about what Julian said. He's an idiot. 2:15 p.m. Theo, are you really going to let that guy win? 7 p.m. Theo. I'm sorry, please. Just one surprise. On the house, no reply. The read receipts were the only sign that Luca was even alive. Across town, Luca was vibrating not from caffeine, but from the lack of it. His hands were steady for the first time in months, yet his drawings were lifeless. He had tried making his own coffee, but it tasted like burnt dirt and resentment. He missed the cardamom. He missed the sea salt. Most of all, he missed the way Theo looked at him when he thought Luca wasn't paying attention. He stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over Theo's name. Charity work, Luca whispered to his empty apartment. He probably just liked having a fan. But then he looked at the sketch on his desk. It wasn't a building. It was a study of Theo's hands, the way the tendons moved when he leveled the portafilter. It wasn't polite shadows anymore. It was deep, dark, and messy. It was exactly what Theo had challenged him to do. Back at the shop, Theo was closing up. He looked at the architect's table. A stray charcoal smudge was still visible on the wood. A tiny black scar from Luca's broken pencil in Chapter 4. Theo grabbed a rag to wipe it away, but stopped. He couldn't do it. Instead, he pulled a sketchbook of his own from beneath the counter, the one he hadn't touched in 3 years. He sat in Luca's chair, the wobbly one, and opened to a blank page. If Luca wasn't going to come for the coffee, Theo would have to give him something else to look at. Chapter 11. The bell didn't scream for mercy this time. It gave a tentative, rhythmic ting as Luca pushed the door open. It was 7:55 a.m. The shop was cold, the morning light filtering through the windows in long, dusty shafts. Theo was behind the bar, his back to the door as he dialed in the espresso machine. He looked tired. His shoulders were slumped in a way that made Luca's chest ache with a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. Luca didn't go to his table. He didn't check his phone. He walked straight to the counter and stood there, clutching a flat rectangular package wrapped in brown butcher paper. Theo turned around, the steam wand hissing a final lonely breath. He froze. The pitcher in his hand tilted dangerously, but he didn't seem to notice. "You're late," Theo said, his voice gravelly and devoid of its usual bite. "By about 4 days." "The traffic was bad," Luca managed, his heart performing a frantic tap dance against his ribs. "And I had to finish something." "Julian isn't here." "Luca, in case you were worried about the guest list, I don't care about Julian," Luca said, and he realized with a jolt of clarity that it was true. "I cared about what he said. But then I realized something. You don't make coffee for people like Julian. You don't even talk to them if you can help it." Theo set the pitcher down on the drain tray with a metallic clack. "I haven't made a surprise since Tuesday. I forgot how to guess what people want when the only person I'm thinking about won't walk through the door." Luca felt the breath leave his lungs. He slid the butcher paper package across the marble counter. "I don't want a surprise today, Theo. I want the usual." Theo looked at the package, then back at Luca. "The usual." "Yeah, the guy who draws boxes and stares at your hands." "I brought you something. Hey, consultation fee." Theo's long fingers worked the tape, pulling back the paper. He went silent. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a full-color illustration, rendered in a mix of technical precision and messy, soulful charcoal. It was the shop tall, dark, and decaf butt seen through Luca's eyes. The perspective lines of the ceiling beams were perfect, but the center of the piece was Theo. He was mid-pour, surrounded by a halo of steam that looked like a storm cloud. His eyes focused on the cup with an intensity that bordered on reverence. The shadows weren't polite. They were deep, dark, and unapologetic. "You used the charcoal," Theo whispered, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. "You told me I was afraid of the dark," Luca said, stepping closer until only the espresso machine stood between them. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the shadows and not of whatever this is." Theo looked up, and for the first time, the stoic barista was nowhere to be found. His eyes were bright, his guard completely demolished. He reached across the counter, his hand finding Luca's and squeezing tight. "I'm not a charity project, Theo, am I?" "Luca," Theo breathed, his voice breaking. "You're the only thing in this city that doesn't feel like work. You're the masterpiece. I'm just the guy trying to figure out how to frame you." Theo didn't let go of his hand. He leaned over the counter, his forehead resting against Luca's. "So, one usual, coming up." Actually, Luca smiled, a tear finally escaping and hitting the marble. "Surprise me." Chapter 12. The shop was officially closed, but the open sign was still flipped to red. Outside, the city was settling into a hazy, violet twilight. But inside, the only light came from the warm glow of the pastry case and the soft amber lamps over the bar. Theo wasn't behind the counter anymore. He was sitting on a high stool next to Luca at the architect's table, which was now cluttered, with both of their sketchbooks and a single shared plate of almond croissants. "You're procrastinating," Theo murmured, leaning over to look at Luca's latest drawing, a reimagining of the city library with vaulted, steam-curled ceilings. "I'm gathering inspiration," Luca countered, though his hand was currently busy doodling a small, grumpy-looking coffee bean in the corner of the page. "Besides, I'm waiting for my drink." "You said it was a special occasion surprise." Theo stood up, his movements fluid and relaxed. He didn't head for the espresso machine this time. He walked over to a small, hand-labeled carafe he'd tucked away in the fridge earlier that afternoon. He poured a dark, shimmering liquid into 2 chilled glasses. He added a twist of orange peel and a single clear ice cube. "No steam?" Luca asked, raising an eyebrow. "No steam," Theo confirmed, sliding the glass across the wood. "This is a cold brew old-fashioned. It's slow-steeped for 24 hours. It takes patience, precision, and it doesn't work if you rush it." Luca took a sip. It was smooth, sophisticated, and hit with a deep, chocolatey resonance that lingered long after the swallow. It tasted like stability. It tasted like them. "It's perfect," Luca whispered. Theo didn't sit back down. He stayed standing, his hand resting on the back of Luca's chair. "I told the owner I'm taking a leave of absence next month." "Just for a few weeks." Luca's heart stuttered. "A leave? Are you leaving?" "I'm going back to the studio," Theo said, his voice steady. "I'm not joining Julian's gallery, but I'm painting again. I realized I don't have to bleed onto the canvas if I have someone there to help me keep the pulse." Luca stood up, chair scraping softly against the floor. He reached out, his fingers catching the hem of Theo's black apron, the one that had felt like a suit of armor for so long. "And who is this person?" "Do I need to be jealous of your new muse?" Theo laughed, a real, resonant sound that filled the empty shop. He reached out, cupping Luca's face with both hands. His palms were warm, smelling faintly of citrus and roasted beans. "He's a very demanding architect who refuses to order off the menu," Theo said softly. "He's a disaster with charcoal, a genius with windows, and he's the only surprise I ever want to have to figure out." Theo leaned in, and this time there were no bells, no Julians, and no counters between them. The kiss was slow and deep, tasting of cold brew and honey. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a finished blueprint, solid foundation for everything they were going to build next. When they finally pulled apart, Luca was breathless, his head resting against Theo's shoulder. "So," Luca teased, his voice muffled by Theo's shirt, "does this mean I get a discount on my drinks now?" Theo pulled back just enough to look Luca in the eye, a familiar, dry smirk returning to his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fresh white takeaway cup. He clicked a lid onto it and handed it to Luca. On the side, written in that same bold architectural Sharpie, was a new label: "Property of tea, no surprises necessary." "You get a lifetime subscription," Theo whispered. "But you're still not allowed behind the counter without supervision." Luca laughed, tucked the cup under his arm, and leaned back in for one more usual.